was also some concern over the backwards compatibility because it said compatible games, and some people thought it meant, oh, well, the Labo stuff, because the new Switch will be bigger, it won't fit in the Labo stuff, so they had to put that there. I said it was because they were emulating Nintendo Switch 1 games. As much as they bitched about emulation for the Switch 1 coming out so soon, I think they're using it. And it looks like I might have been right. They're calling it solved because they solved it for their games, which are the games they care about. But it sounds like it's using emulation. They absolutely could have solved this problem hardware-wise. They would have had to make a special motherboard. It would have cost more money. They would have had to include that chipset, so that, and a way for the system to tell when you've put in a Switch 1 game, when you put in a Switch 2 game, to tell it which chipset to use. It's not an unsolvable problem. It's just a more expensive problem. Some would argue that that would make the system more expensive. I don't think so. I think they're charging you the price that they would charge if they had done that, and they've cut that corner and not done it so that they can produce the system as cheaply as possible, but still charge you that premium as if that feature were 100% compatible, just like it was with their past consoles. All these kids, all you fucking Gen Zers who apparently weren't taught basic economics in grade school, the free market works off of money. If you don't give a company your money at a particular price, they lower the price to get your money, because selling it at a cheaper price gets them more money than not selling it at all. That's how it works. That's how the free market works. So all these kids over here yelling, we're cooked, prices are going to go up, we're cooked. You're not cooked. You control this. Vote with your wallet. Don't buy it. We can start this. But there was also some concern over the backwards compatibility because it said compatible games, and some people thought it meant, oh, well, the Labo stuff, because the new Switch will be bigger, it won't fit in the Labo stuff, so they had to put that there. I said it was because they were emulating Nintendo Switch 1 games. As much as they bitched about emulation for the Switch 1 coming out so soon, I think they're using it. And it looks like I might have been right. But anyway, this guy seems to have done the legwork for us.
In that video, I talked about the challenges Nintendo would face in bringing backward compatible Switch 1 titles to their successor hardware, which we now know as
it wouldn't be that hard
talk about backward compatibility
if they just include a chipset for it.
That the new Nintendo hardware will be fully backward compatible with the Nintendo Switch. But I'm here to tell you that I wouldn't be so sure, and this is the root cause of the backward compatibility problem. A new SoC to power a new Switch hardware will simply not be binary compatible with this code, even though it's still on ARM64. Now, to be very clear, I never once suggested that the Switch 2 won't ever be backward compatible. In reality, I discussed the various challenges Nintendo would face and how they could solve them in bringing backward compatible Switch 1 titles to the Switch 2. This is because I asserted that the Switch 2 SoC would not be binary compatible with the Switch 1 SoC, and Nintendo would face challenges in running Switch 1 games on the Switch 2. And I walked through each possible scenario that Nintendo could choose to solve this backward compatibility problem, hence the name of the video. A lot of people were quick to discredit me, saying MVG is saying that backward compatibility is not happening. Now, while the majority of people understood the concerns,
happening, but with an
many
asterisk.
were quick to disregard me, calling me a grifter, a clickbaiter. MVG doesn't know what he's talking about.
I mean, most
He's just a dumb
Nintendo channels
YouTuber.
are clickbait,
Of course,
if we're
the
being
Switch
honest.
will be 100% backward compatible because Nintendo has solved this problem for years, ever since the days of the Game Boy
God, the
Color.
Nintendo
I was
shields
also
are
told that my
insane.
information about the Switch 2 SoC not being binary compatible with the Switch 1 SoC was false. Now, for the record, if you are new here, I do want to point a few things out. I've worked in the video game industry since 2019. I've developed a custom engine that powers many old retro games via emulation known as the Carbon Engine.
Okay,
I've
so you're an
shipped
actual
games
coder.
on all major consoles, and before this, I've worked with many various homebrew efforts since 2001. I love software development. I love video game hardware.
So you
and
basically,
something that I
you know what the
completely
fuck you're
nerd
talking
out
about.
Now, my video about the Switch 2 backward compatibility problem was not meant to be clickbait. In fact, as we'll find out, I was exactly right. So this particular information comes from the Ask a Developer blog series on Nintendo.com, and it really kind of goes into pretty detailed analysis and discussion about how Nintendo were able to solve the backward compatibility problem, hence what I was talking about 2.5 years ago. And right from the jump, they're very transparent about how they were able to solve this problem. And it is one of those particular scenarios that I outlined in my video. So let's go ahead and kind of read through this. Now it says here, right from the beginning, we wanted the new system to be able to play Switch games, but back then we were told there would be technical challenges. When we first started Switch 2 development, the focus was enhancing its performance as hardware, namely expanding its capacity. So what they're saying here is that the new platform,
make it not
the focus of the new platform,
make it powerful
is
enough to
the
run
new
modern
platform
games,
rather than thinking about, you know, playing old games on that new platform. That sort of is something
they got to
that
catch
comes
up to the current
later on,
generation,
potentially through the life cycle of the hardware design
which makes
and
sense.
development. And then it goes on to say, for
That
example,
would be the
Nintendo
priority.
DS games were playable on 3DS, and Wii games were playable on Wii U. But it was difficult to achieve the same level of compatibility with Switch 2 because the hardware design approach was different from those systems. So what they're saying here is that in the past, Nintendo has always solved backward compatibility by simply providing the appropriate backward compatible hardware.
Yeah, by putting the hardware
motherboard.
in the
So
system.
when we talk about the 3DS, to
Which
the
could have
DS,
been done
there is
here.
backward compatible DS hardware. The DS had backward compatible GBA hardware on the motherboard. The Wii U had backward compatible Wii hardware on its motherboard, so it was always a lot easier just to run those games, and you'll notice that those games are always running in their own little sandbox. Now, moving on, it says it's tricky to
like if you're familiar with PC coding, it's kind of like having a virtual machine where you can create a separate instance of Windows or another operating system within Windows that runs on a separate chipset. This absolutely could have been done in the Switch. It would, if they did that, it would actually justify the price tag, but they're relying on emulation. So their $450 fucking price tag makes no sense. If they had actually included that one extra chipset in there to run the Switch games, if they had included that on the motherboard, so it had one processor for when you're running Switch 2 games and one processor for when you're running Switch games. So you'd have 100% compatibility with each. But they didn't do that. If they had done that, it would justify the $450 price tag. And that's basically what he's saying here, is that in the past, they did that. They did that on the 3DS. They did that on the Wii and the Wii U. Yeah. So that was absolutely a thing. The Wii was 100% compatible with GameCube games. And the Wii U basically had a Wii also inside it, as well as the chipset for the Wii U. They were basically dual hardware. It was like having two consoles in one. And they're not doing that with this one. But still charging you as if they were, which is part of the problem.
Explain, maybe the easiest way to understand it is that the methods used to achieve compatibility between Nintendo DS and 3DS,
I'm guessing it's
and
emulation,
between
and I think
Switch
I'm
and
right.
Switch 2 are completely different. Simply put, those systems were compatible because Nintendo 3DS contained DS hardware, and Wii U contained Wii hardware, as we said.
Yeah,
However,
it was like having
Switch
two consoles
2
in
doesn't
one.
contain any Switch
But the Switch
hardware.
2 is emulating
This
the
is where
Switch
we
1
get
games.
into the meat of the discussion. Does this mean that Switch and Switch 2 aren't compatible at a hardware level? Exactly.
Yeah,
This time we decided
what
to
that
take
means.
on the challenge of using new technology to run Switch games. If
Which
we tried to
means
use the
emulation.
technology
They're
like
avoiding saying the
software
word, but that's what
emulators,
it means.
We'd have to run Switch 2 at full capacity. But that would mean the battery wouldn't last so long, so we did something that's somewhere in between a software emulator and hardware compatibility. Now, of course, we still don't have all the information in front of us, but Nintendo has given us enough information to kind of piece together how
they're
they
using
have
emulation.
solved for this. And it's essentially
Never
a
played this
combination of software-based emulation with hooks into the T239 and some type of translation layer. Now, we have to remember that we're talking about two different architectures when it comes to the NVIDIA SoCs. We're talking about Maxwell-based, and we're also talking about Ampere with the new SoC. Now, on the CPU side, I would say that there probably hasn't been much work, and this is where the hardware itself is doing most of the heavy lifting. In fact, there's probably a very thin wrapper in the emulation layer that's been developed that effectively just intercepts any type of OS and service level calls, and then almost one-to-one translates those to the new SoC architecture. Translation layers is something that's becoming a lot more popular when we talk about modern emulation techniques.
Yeah,
if you're
it's
emulating
emulation.
a system from the past that
He's
runs the
talking
same
about it on a
architecture
technical level,
as
but
the
that's
target
basically what he's
system,
saying.
then a translation layer can
It's
really
translating
be
what you're
very
asking
effective
into the
rather than
system
just
you're asking
writing
it to
a
run on.
traditional emulation stack. So on the CPU side, it doesn't appear as though Nintendo really needed to do that much work to build a translation layer between the two systems. Now on the GPU side, Nintendo
that's right. I
almost
came in from a different
certainly
angle.
have
God, I hate
built
this
a
track.
lot of code in their emulation software in order to facilitate all the various aspects of emulating a Switch 1 GPU on the Switch 2. Now, when we're talking about the GPU side, it becomes a lot more
Another settlement needs my help.
because we're talking about shaders that need to be recompiled to run.
You talking about
on the
Nintendo's
Switch
fan
2.
base?
Now, you might be wondering, what
Fuck,
is
I
the
hate that they
reason
put
for
that shit on the edge of
recompiling
the track.
shaders? Well, at the end of the day, when a Switch game is shipped and sent off for certification, everything is embedded into that ROM file, into the the ROM that you download if you purchase with the eShop, for example. The driver stack itself is embedded into the game itself, which means that for backward compatibility to work, that needs to be reconstructed on a Nintendo Switch 2. And because the Maxwell architecture is different from Ampere, we're talking about binary incompatibilities. It also means that shaders will need to be recompiled as well. So they'll effectively need to be decompiled and then rebuilt in real time to run on the Switch 2.
On the new
hardware. I think that's what Nintendo has done here. Now, I think a really great example to kind of explain this in better terms.
Basically, they're going around their elbow to get to their ass. When it would have been more expensive to include the chipset from the original Switch in the Switch 2 to just make it a hardware boom compatibility thing, but instead they've chosen emulation. So when you put in a Switch 1 game, it has to be decompiled and then recompiled in the emulator. So it can't run directly on the hardware. The hardware has to decompile that, translate it into the emulation. So basically now it's being recompiled as a Switch 1 game and then shot to your system. They're emulating the Switch 1 games, is the roundabout way of saying that. They're probably going to run slower. They're not going to have 100% compatibility. That's why the little asterisk next to it that says compatible Switch games, because it's just like running an emulation, a Switch emulator on your computer. Before they shut those down, the Switch emulators on computers still couldn't run every Switch game. So they're basically using their own home-built version of that. And I wouldn't be surprised if they stole some code from that to do it. But you could see where the controversy is coming from here.
I made a video on, I think about 2 years ago, known as Vita to HOS. And basically, this will take native Vita executables and they can run natively on the Nintendo Switch. And this is a proof of concept that I made a video on. It just basically displayed a simple triangle, but it was running a Vita executable on a Switch without any smoke or mirrors. And as you can see, it's supporting a translation layer, not an emulator. And again, this is what I think Nintendo is doing on the CPU side. But if you look further down
form of emulation
into the README file and look at the information, you can see here that they're talking about the various ways that they have to recompile shaders. In this instance, in order for the Vita shaders to run on the Switch, they need to be recompiled with Vita 3K, which is a Vita emulator, or at least the part of the code that manages the recompilation side.
So part of the game has to be emulated
for shader compilation. So Nintendo themselves have set up a website that shows the list of compatible Nintendo Switch games on the Nintendo Switch 2. And this is a very interesting chart for a couple of reasons that I want to talk about. The first one is, if we take a look at this chart, you can see that there is a lot of blue here, and it kind of tells you that almost the entire suite of Nintendo Switch games will run via backward compatibility. But let's take a closer look at everything. So this is the Nintendo games, the first party Nintendo games, and you can see here that we're talking only a very small percentage of first party Nintendo games not running on the Nintendo Switch 2, and that makes a lot of sense.
And you're probably talking like Nintendo Labo, because obviously the Switch 2 won't fit into the Nintendo Labo that was designed around the Switch 1. The Switch 2 is bigger, so it just won't physically fit inside of it. It's probably stuff like that. They've probably made sure that all of their more popular games, your Zeldas, your Marios, Metroids, they're all going to be emulatable and running fine on the Switch 2. Which makes sense, because those are the games that were focused on when emulation was a thing on computer before Nintendo shut it down. All of those hackers made sure that Nintendo games would run on the emulator. It was the third-party stuff that they had problems with. So, like I said, still wouldn't be surprised if Nintendo stole some of their code or, tried to use some of that in order to get their emulation working. And that would explain why all of their stuff's compatible. And they probably worked on their own stuff behind the scenes, too. They do have access to those games' original code, as well as the Switch hardware is original. Yeah, so it makes sense that all of their stuff would be 100% compatible. So I'm curious if it says what isn't compatible, because if that lines up with what isn't compatible in emulation, then you'll know that they're using a lot of code from that Yuzu emulator that they shut down.
Sense to me,
which is what
of
people
course,
think
they're
they're
the
doing.
ones that build
That's why
the
this is a
emulation
controversy.
stack. They're also the ones that basically know the hardware better than anyone else. So of course, as they're designing the backward compatibility layer, they can continue to iterate and get their games up and running first. So if we take a look at the partner games, which there's over 15,000. By the way, that is a lot of Switch games. 15,000. That's a.
If they're counting all the eShop slop, then that makes sense. 15,000 games. Do you know how many like $2 fucking eShop slop games there are? Have you guys actually tried to look at the eShop on your Switch? It's amazing that the fucking company that's selling their console as the family-friendly company, you go on the eShop and you just go scrolling through it. Like, basically, you have to search for the game you want. Because if you go hit the deals tab and just search through deals on the Switch itself and go through the eShop, you are going to be bombarded with slop. I mean, like 20 or 30 of these games must come out a fucking day. And it's quick cash grab games, $2 or $3 a piece. Stuff like Brick Breaker, and then there's just straight up, hey, here's a mobile game, we put it on Switch. And then there is the absolute fucking mountain of AI slop hentai games. And they're not even hiding it or pretending not to be hentai games. They just call themselves hentai, like in the title. Hentai princess, hentai this, hentai that. Like it's just they just, the Switch has a hentai problem. Amazing that the family-friendly console is the console with the hentai problem. But nobody ever talks about that. Wonder if he'll mention it.
A lot more than I had ever expected that there would be. You can see that there is, let's say, 22% of that 15,000 have no issues during backward compatibility testing, which means that these games should run perfectly, right? So if you look at this next block, you can see that we're talking almost 80%. Let's say it's 70% because there is a little bit down here, and of course, you know, maybe 2% up here. But let's say it's 70% of games that can be started, but further tests are in progress. So this isn't necessarily telling us that all these games are going to run fine. This is telling us that
they're going to have issues. Yeah, which is the exact thing that happened on the Yuzu emulator. They had a graph like that would, you know, tell you the level of compatibility for each game that ran in the emulator. It would say fully playable, 100% playable. It would say mostly playable, and then it would tell you if it had issues with cutscenes or issues with loading, or like if there was a certain level that wouldn't load and a way around it. Yeah, partially playable. Yeah, it would tell you the level of playable each game was. So it sounds like they're doing the same thing here. So far, a lot of what they're doing is lining up with, it's lining up with the emulator that they shut down. It sounds like they shut down the emulator and then stole it. Which wouldn't be the first time that Nintendo's done that, by the way.
And get in game, but because we have 15,000 of them, we still need to do further testing to ensure that these games
it's a lot of slop games they have to check.
Now, what I would expect to see is that this list, this blue list, this solid blue list, should start to get bigger as this kind of lighter blue gets smaller. But the big takeaway for me here, guys, is that this is no guarantee that these games will run from start to finish. All they're saying here is that these games can be started and further tests are in progress. So that is very interesting, and that reminds me of the old days of the original Xbox backward compatibility on the 360. There were about 500 titles that would run on the Xbox 360.
But they didn't try to hide that. They told you they were emulating it.
One great example is Jet Set Radio Future, a game that was listed on the backward compatibility list, but as you
and then they quit updating that emulator, which is why some games never got backward compatibility.
And Nintendo hasn't really gone through all these games yet because they simply need a lot more time in order to kind of, you know, check these off and say that these games are fully working. Now, this is the list of the partner games that are currently not able to start up on the Switch 2 via backward compatibility, and you can see there's a list of about 150 of them. Now, by themselves, this looks like a very big list of games, But
Yeah.
when you compare it to the 15,000 partner games, it's actually quite a small percentage. But what's interesting here is that Nintendo is continuing to kind of work through and investigate the reason why some of these games aren't starting. Now, I also want to be very transparent with you guys and let you know that some of the Carbon Engine titles that I've worked on are also on this list as well. Here's an example of one right here, Trip World DX. There's also a couple of others that are on this list. Now, unfortunately, I can't really talk about the discussions about backward compatibility in too much detail as it pertains to the stuff that I'm working on, but I am confident that Nintendo will be able to rectify these issues. But the big takeaway here, guys, really is that
Nintendo's using
100%
emulation.
backward compatibility was never going to be a thing for the Nintendo Switch 2. It was always going to be a situation
As long as it's using
where we're
emulation,
looking
yes,
at
that's the
games
case.
that simply just don't run. And I think at the end of the day, Nintendo certainly has done the right thing when it comes to backward compatibility, especially since the Tegra X1 on the motherboard solution was not an option this time round.
It could have
And
been.
Look,
There's no
ultimately, I
reason
think
it
this is
couldn't
going
have
to
been.
be
It would
good
just would have
enough,
cost more money.
But I am still a little bit curious about this 70% or so of games that can be started and further tests in progress, because for me, guys, this doesn't necessarily tell me that all these games are going to run end to end. There still potentially could be a lot of issues when it comes to backward compatibility, and really this is kind of what I was talking about all along in my particular video, and I hope you guys can understand what I was going for here. I was not trying to, upset anyone or, clickbait a video or anything along those lines. It's really just about education and understanding that although Nintendo in the past has done things a certain way when it comes to backward compatibility, they obviously, and they have since confirmed that they're doing things in a much more software-based way, which I think is very interesting. So there you have it, guys. That is backward compatibility on the Nintendo Switch 2. As mentioned, Nintendo did have a problem. They have seemed to have solved it, but it really does remain to be seen how well it actually performs in real-world tests. We haven't seen anything from Nintendo at this point about backward compatibility.
They solved it for their games because those are the ones they care about.
Tree houses, all
that's
the
what that means.
Press events yet.
The fact that they're not talking about it should be a massive red flag for everybody.
In the real world, I know some people are questioning: will there be updates and enhancements and maybe some type of resolution bump or frame rate
Not unless
bump?
it's AI scaling.
I don't believe that to be the case.
Maybe DLSS
at best. Traditional emulation where it basically tries to run one-to-one with the original game.
That's
I think
more than likely.
Beyond that
He's right.
is
It's
going
more
to
than likely
be
what they're going
just
for.
based on Switch 2 patches that come out as the kind of updates that you've seen for games like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom that have enhancements to frame rates and resolutions. But anything that is backward compatible based on your Nintendo account or Switch 1 games that you put into your Switch will run pretty much just as you would have expected them to without any type of performance boost. But they are just my thoughts and opinions on backward compatibility on the Nintendo Switch 2. It's a great thing that Nintendo has solved the problem. It will still remain to be seen what the execution of that looks like in the real world, and when people actually start testing it themselves to see what type of issues that they may or may not come up against when they start to run their favorite games. But we are going to leave it here for today's episode, guys. If you liked it, don't forget to leave me a thumbs up, and we'll catch you guys in the next episode. Bye for now.
Sorry, buddy, you're gonna get it. If I can stop hiding from me. Ah, damn it. Damn it. Okay, well, that explains that. I'm going to say that they haven't 100% solved it. They're calling it solved because they solved it for their games, which are the games they care about. But it sounds like it's using emulation. They absolutely could have solved this problem hardware-wise. They would have had to make a special motherboard. It would have cost more money. They would have had to include that chipset so that, and a way for the system to tell when you've put in a Switch 1 game, when you put in a Switch 2 game, to tell it which chipset to use. It's not an unsolvable problem. It's just a more expensive problem. Some would argue that would make the system more expensive. I don't think so. I think they're charging you the price that they would charge if they had done that, and they've cut that corner and not done it so that they can produce the system as cheaply as possible, but still charge you that premium as if that feature were 100% compatible, just like it was with their past consoles. The Wii U was 100% compatible with the Wii. The Wii was 100% compatible with the GameCube. The 3DS was 100% compatible with the DS because all of those systems contained the original hardware for the system before it. There was no emulation happening. You put that old game in there, it switched over to that old game's hardware and just ran it like normal. The Switch 2 could have absolutely done that. They chose to go the emulation route because it was cheaper. But they're still charging you $450, which is the price I would expect if it had 2 pieces of hardware in it to run 2 separate libraries of games, but it doesn't have that. They have cut corners everywhere they can cut corners, and still charged you a premium, and that's where everyone's mad. There seems to be more of a backlash over the games themselves than the price of the console. I think the price of the console is too high. Some people say it's fine. I don't think it is. The games are definitely overpriced if they're going to charge $80 for games instead of the traditional $70. And the worst part is you can try to justify that because Nintendo, which their fans will absolutely do. But if Nintendo gets away with this, then Sony's going to think they can get away with it. Then Xbox is going to think they can get away with it. It's going to become the new market standard. Okay, so now why are my games more expensive? Because your console needed them to be more expensive. That's why you can't allow this to happen. And all these kids, all you fucking Gen Zers who apparently weren't taught basic economics in grade school, the free market works off of money. If you don't give a company your money at a particular price, they lower the price to get your money, because selling it at a cheaper price gets them more money than not selling it at all. That's how it works. That's how the free market works. So all these kids over here yelling, we're cooked, prices are going to go up, we're cooked. You're not cooked. You control this. Vote with your wallet. Don't buy it. And if you need proof that that's how it works, if you need a one-to-one comparison, buy Nintendo. They tried this exact same thing with the launch of the 3DS. I remember I was working at GameStop at the time. That system came out insanely expensive. I want to say it was close to $400. It was like $350 for a handheld system. It was as much as like a PlayStation 3. Like, I remember people bitching about that, and it just would not sell. There were some people who bought it at launch, sure, some pre-orders. But after that initial launch, like, no one new came in and was buying it off the shelf. People just weren't buying it, and they had to lower the price. Within like 2 months of the system's launch, they lowered the price almost in half. They also gave away 20 free games to people who bought the system at its launch price. They were called 3DS ambassadors. It was their ambassador program. You can look it up. Basically, if you owned a 3DS system, a 3DS launch system, they had a list of serial numbers that sold. And if you had one of those systems that sold at that price, that system was considered an ambassador system and automatically got sent 20 free games from the eShop that they could download. It was tied to the system itself and not your account. So if you traded in that system and tried to get the cheaper one and keep the 20 free games, you couldn't. You had to keep that launch system. Also, if something happened to your launch system, or you wanted to upgrade to a collector's edition later, you needed to replace that system for any reason, you also lost those 20 games. But the bottom line was people didn't spend that money. People refused to buy it at that price. And because of that, they lowered the price. They also tried to increase the price of games, making 3DS games more expensive than what DS games were at the time. That also didn't fly. People weren't buying those more expensive games. They dropped the price of those games. They basically backtracked on all of those changes they tried to make. They were doing the exact same thing then that they're doing now. They had a really popular system. They were struggling. They had a really popular system. The DS was a popular system. Then the Wii was a popular system. So every time Nintendo's company starts to get back on its feet and do really well, they start getting greedy because they're like, oh, we're back on top, baby. They'll buy whatever we tell them to. They get greedy. They get egotistical, prideful, whatever you want to call it. But the DS was a super successful system. So they're like, oh, this is the new DS. People are going to eat this up no matter what we tell them to pay for it. You know, no matter what we charge for it, they're going to just gobble this thing up. It's the new 3D. It's the new DS. They have to have it. That was not the case. We don't have to have it, not at that price. And now they're showing that same arrogance again with the Switch. Oh, it's the new Switch. People have to have it. People have to have the Switch too. Look, you can use it as a mouse. Look, it's got shittier Discord. Yeah, like we have voice chat now. Like all the features they showed off are features that you can do on other consoles and have been able to do on other consoles for like 10 plus years at this point. Other consoles just have Discord plus voice chat. They had to do their own Discord because they don't want kids to use Discord. Only their version runs at like 2 frames a second and looks shitty. They have a webcam, even though other consoles have tried webcams in the past. People just don't want webcams on consoles. But sure, Nintendo, do 20-year-old, like they need a gimmick to sell this thing and to justify that price tag because they're jacking the price way up. Voice chat's been around since Xbox 360, standard on all consoles. Another thing people aren't talking about is the fact that the voice chat requires a subscription to use, which is insane to me. I understand needing a subscription to play games online. All consoles do that. I mean, PC doesn't, but all consoles do that. If you want to play online, you got to have a subscription to, PlayStation Network, PlayStation Plus. You got to have a subscription to Xbox Live. Got that. But if you want to use the party chat feature on your Xbox, you don't have to pay anything. You can just use it. If you want to use the party chat feature, the built-in chat feature on your PlayStation or your Xbox, no subscription required. That is a standard feature. If you want to use Discord, no subscription required. You can just log into your Discord account. The fact that you have to pay a subscription to use voice chat is fucking insane to me. And no one's talking about that. I mean, everybody is rightfully focused on the $80 games because those have the potential to ruin the entire industry. But like, Nintendo's charging and nickel and diming for every single thing as if they are selling you the newest possible technology, and they're not. Even the mouse feature, it's cool that you can do it with a controller, but who wants to hold a little controller sideways as a mouse with these 2 little really close together buttons? And it looks like it'd be uncomfortable to actually use as a game and mouse. Like, you're not going to do it for anything competitive. I know Call of Duty's supposed to be coming to this system. Are you really going to be playing Call of Duty on your Switch 2 with a keyboard/mouse kind of setup with a Joy-Con mouse controls for aiming with that little bitty... No one's going to do that. It looks super uncomfortable. No competitive serious player is going to do that. If you want to play with a keyboard and mouse on every other console for Call of Duty, you can just plug up a keyboard and mouse. And if the Switch doesn't have the ability to plug up a regular keyboard and mouse, but if you want mouse controls in games, you have to use their shitty fucking their shitty fucking Joy-Con mice. That's a huge L. I mean, I hope that that's not the case. I do like the fact that you can use the Switch 2 Joy-Cons as mice, because the only reason that I like it, even though it looks uncomfortable, is because the fact that they're included with every system and they're just a controller you're always going to have means that it has the potential to make mouse controls standard for all games on all consoles, which is something that's needed to happen for years now. So I'm happy for that. Not every game does that on Xbox and PlayStation, even though the Xbox and PlayStation have mouse and keyboard support baked into the console. It'll just recognize it. You can just use it on your PlayStation or Xbox in the menus. Like, it's automatic, just like on Windows. But because it doesn't come with the console, some games like Apex Legends and Overwatch don't include mouse and keyboard support, but they do crossplay with mouse and keyboard players. I think that's a huge L that needs more criticism. But anyway, the fucking Switch 2's Joy-Cons might finally be the thing to make mouse and keyboard support standard in all games. I just really hope that the Switch 2 has the ability to hook up just a standard keyboard and mouse so that you don't have to use that Joy-Con if you don't want to. That's what I hope. But we'll see. I'm cautiously optimistic. I like the system itself. I like the features it's doing, even if they aren't anything spectacular. None of them are as great as the version of those features on other consoles. But because it's Nintendo, it's quirky and it's theirs. Fine, whatever. I'm glad those things are finally on a Switch system. I don't see the camera lasting too long, because people are just they're just gonna show their dicks on it. Like, it's just gonna be genitals, and then Nintendo's gonna like drop support for the device. The same thing we went through on the Xbox and the PlayStation. People were all excited for that camera when it first came out, and then within a couple years they drop support for those cameras in games, and then they start moderating the hell out of them because people just started showing their dicks to each other and trolling each other with dick pics. Yeah, that's just what it's gonna turn into. So my verdict right now, the more I hear about the system, the more, my stance is going to stay the same until the price changes. No matter what features that they say they've added, no matter how much, like even if they show the specs, like until they drop the prices. I'm not even saying drop the price of the console. Like I want to see the specs so that you can justify that price tag. I don't think it's worth $450. But if you can show me something to show me that the console itself, that the hardware I'm paying for is worth $450, okay, fine, it's $450. But there's no reason you should be trying to increase the standard price of video games as a whole. Like until that price tag goes down, I'm not giving them my money, and none of you should either. So that's my final verdict. If I learned anything else new about the system, the emulation I thought was kind of big because I told everybody they would probably use emulation, and everybody told me I was crazy. They're shutting down emulators. Nintendo hates emulation. All the Nintendo ninjas came and gave me shit for it, and you were all fucking wrong. It is emulation. Yes, they shut down emulators because they didn't want competition. They're going to use them. They stole those emulators, and they're using them on Switch 2. So, just saying, you were wrong. If they do anything else shady and I learn about it, fine. But right now, my number one focus is on the price. So, don't buy the system. Just don't until they lower the game prices. You can buy the system at its full price. They don't have to lower the system price. I think they should, but they don't have to. You should definitely boycott them until they lower the game prices, though. Or don't buy any game that costs $80. If they sell you games at $70, like I think Donkey Kong is $70 and some of the other ones are standard price, you buy those games. Don't buy any game for $80 ever. And as long as those games don't sell at full price, then they won't charge that price for them. Don't let this become the new standard. That's all I ask. That is the main thing I'm fighting against here. Is not to let that become the new standard. Oh my God, I can't get off of this. Jesus. Okay. Well, that's fun. The Nintendo debacle is still a debacle. I'm so disappointed because this was like an easy W for them, and I can't believe they botched it this hard. I can't believe they fucked this up this bad. All you had to do was make the same console a second time and throw in a couple new features. That's all you had to do. That's all you had to do. And that's what they did. Like, all you had to do was do that and charge $350. $50 more than a regular Switch. Maybe $400 max if you include some more features or you really put some bells and whistles on it. But honestly, it's like a Switch Pro. All you had to do was drop the price of the original Switch so you can still make some money off the people who want an original Switch, and then charge $350 for this one. So this one's a little more expensive than the regular Switch's launch price, and you also lowered the price of the original Switch. So now you get more sales on your original Switch, and you'd get more sales on your Switch too. It was such an easy W, and I can't believe they fucked it up this fucking bad, man. I hope no one buys this thing until they lower the price. Because if no one buys it, if everyone says, I'm going to wait till Christmas anyway, and they just wait, don't buy it at launch, let the scalpers just... And you'll be getting a dunk on the scalpers too, because you know it's going to sell out because of scalpers. But if the scalpers can't resell it, and then the second wave of the system, when there's no scalpers buying it, doesn't sell either, then you just won. Like, that's it. Scalpers are left taking an L. They've spent $450 and now they're struggling to sell it. And Nintendo can't sell the console at that increased price, which means they're going to lower the price just like they did with the 3DS. They'll lower it in time for Christmas. They'll play it off as if it's some kind of Christmas sale, and it'll just become the new price. And then everybody wins. All the new games come out at Christmas anyway, come out around the holiday season anyway, so you might as well just wait. And if everybody does that, they'll drop the price in time for the holidays, in time for the launch of all those new games. They'll be able to take the W and play it off as if it's a Black Friday sale or some shit, as if it's a sale price, leaving everybody to believe the price is going to go back up, and then they'll just never make the price go back up. It's kind of the same thing they did with the 3DS. Everyone will win if you just don't buy it at launch. It is that simple. It is absolutely that simple. Don't buy any games at $80 ever, and don't buy this system at launch, and then they'll get the message. They'll lower the price, and we'll have a successful launch that they can still turn this around, just like they did with the 3DS. So, let's repeat history. It's one of the few times I'll say this. We did good last time. Let's do good again this time. Let's repeat history.